Okay, so this is the first lecture on the Neolithic period. And what I thought I'd do is to start us off with a basic definition of civilization, which comes after the Neolithic period. But I thought I would do this so that when we finally get to this stage, you will understand what happened in the Neolithic a little bit better. So as you will tell from the rest of the course, I really like languages. So what I've given you here on this very first slide is where we get the word civilization. So it's a Latin word, civis or civis, meaning inhabitant of a city. And the list I give you here, the three parts of a civilization, it's a basic definition. I'll give you an extended version of this towards the end of the slides. But anyway, what makes up a city, or what is a civilization? It needs cities. So, and usually, rule of thumb, population of a city is around 10,000 people or more. Now, there are exceptions. You find some cities in Egypt which are less than 10,000 but still have all the other features of a modern city. The other part of the definition is monumental architecture or large buildings. So a really good example of that is a pyramid. So it takes many people, lots of social organization to create something that large, and you find that when people reach the stage of civilization. Another part of civilization is writing. So all the civilizations we'll be looking at in this class have some type of writing. Okay, so on to the Neolithic period. So this is slide 2, and there are a couple ways to remember what's going on here. And the best way to remember the Neolithic period is its other title called the Agricultural Revolution. So it's pretty clear from that title what's happening here. People have learned to domesticate animals and to grow their own food. And again, because of like languages, I've given you here the definition of Neolithic. So neo means new in Greek, and lithic means stone. So literally it's the new Stone Age. But again, it's probably easier to remember that this is called the Agricultural Revolution because that's what's happening. And then the dates I give you here 10,000 BC to about 4,000. That should probably be stretched to about 1,000 BC. And the reason it's so large is because people went into the Neolithic at various time points around the planet. And this map here shows you that. So what you should concentrate on looking at this map are the dark green areas. And that's where you've got agriculture happening at the earliest. So if you start in North, Central, and South America, you can see a dark area in Mexico and in South America. And then moving over, you see a dark area in Southern Europe, Egypt, Mesopotamia. You've got a darker region, early agriculture in India, then in China, and then just north of Australia. The area that's considered to be the earliest in terms of agriculture, or where this happened, was Mesopotamia, or according to this map, the Fertile Crescent. So we're talking about 8,000 BC, and this was a much wetter period. So this green area shows where people could actually grow plants 8,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, and where you necessarily can't grow as many today. So the Fertile Crescent wraps around Mesopotamia. It's a little hard to see here, but you've got the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and then it sweeps to the southwest through Israel, Palestine, Syria. That area, again, was more wetter during this period. So, but it's really the Tigris and Euphrates that makes this area fertile. So these are rivers, and their origins are up in these mountains, the Taurus Mountains and the Zagros Mountains. So it snows in the winter. In the spring it warms up, rain comes down, snow comes down, and these rivers flood. So it's important to have that flooding water. More importantly, too, is the silt that's coming with these rivers. So the rivers flood their banks, dumping all this nice silt. When the rivers go down, the silt stays, and then people can actually grow their food. Now you're probably wondering, how exactly did this happen? So unfortunately we don't have a specific answer for that. So what you do in this case, and it's just like what happens in science, is that you guess and you make these hypotheses. So I've got 3 hypotheses here: the oasis, the nuclear zone, and the population hypothesis, or sometimes it's referred to as a population pressure hypothesis. And these are hypotheses where scholars have tried to guess why people went into farming. And what I thought I'd do really quickly is just go through these three. So let's talk about the first one, the Oasis Hypothesis. So this was discovered by Child, and he is an author that you will be reading in this class on one of the articles. And he was trying to determine why people started farming. So it was his idea that during the last ice age, which is like 12,000 years ago, ice would have come down and reached southwards into the Middle East. And then when the ice age finished, the ice would retreat, leaving all this water, which is why it's called the Oasis Hypothesis. So people need water. So there's large bodies of water, and people would congregate around those. And plants obviously need water. So Child thought that wild plants like wheat and barley would grow in these areas, and people would be there and somehow make the connection between the plant itself, the seeds, and the fact that if you kept the seeds, you could grow them next year. Now, animals need water too. So you've got animals congregating around the bodies of water, and Child thought that what would happen is people would see these animals, capture them, and then domesticate them. So that was his hypothesis. The ice sheets come down into the Middle East. You've got excess or lots of water. People see these plants that are growing, they see the animals, and they move into farming. So what you do with a hypothesis is you then have to test it. On this slide, this shows the maximum extent of the last ice age, and the dark areas are where you've got the ice. And if you look down into the Middle East, you'll see that there are no ice sheets. So what this really means is that Child's hypothesis on why farming started is incorrect. So ice never reached down into the Middle East, and so on. So they were clearly farming there, but not for the reason that Child thought. The next hypothesis I want to talk about is the nuclear zone hypothesis. And this is put forth by two scholars named Peake and Fleury. And the nuclear zone is a special zone. So that's the way you should think about this. So the nuclear zone is a special zone where plants naturally grow. And the plants here we're talking about, especially in the Middle East, are wheat and barley. So these are natural grasses that grow on their own. They just happen to be some of the first grasses that people discovered and domesticated. So Peake and Fleury looked for where these grasses would have been growing naturally, and they called this the nuclear zone. Now, where they were looking, so if you picture in your head a map of Mesopotamia, on the plains, so where these rivers start to empty out into the Persian Gulf, it gets blazing hot in the summer. So plants don't necessarily like 150 degrees. If you move northwards, the elevation starts to rise, gets a little cooler, and then of course you get to the mountains. Now plants won't grow in the high mountains, but in this middle zone, like in the foothills, this is where Peake and Fleury found natural grasses. And it just so happens that you get 1 to 2 feet of rain, which is what plants generally need without help to survive. And then the specific area is about 900 feet to 5,400 feet above sea level. So this is the nuclear zone. And then what you need to ask yourself too about these hypotheses is, how do you test this? So how do you test the nuclear zone? Well, what Peake and Fleury did is they started looking for Neolithic villages within this zone. And sure enough, they found them. But the problem with a lot of hypotheses, in fact, almost all hypotheses have exceptions, they found Neolithic villages outside of the nuclear zone. And what tends to be happening with these villages is that people adapted even further and had irrigation. So if you had less than 12 inches of rain, you could still plant plants and they would survive because you're irrigating. Today people use the nuclear zone hypothesis, but you just have to remember that there are options. The other hypothesis is the population pressure hypothesis. And this one is a fairly easy one to remember. So if you remember that map of the Fertile Crescent, I had mentioned that the climate was warmer 10,000 years ago. So when you've got a warmer climate, you usually have more rain. More rain means more plants. More plants mean people, and we're not really talking about animals here, but animals would be healthier because they could eat more. And when people are healthier, they have more children. So population increased during this period. The problem, though, is that about 7,000 BC, you've got the climate cooling. So less rain available for plants. Now people, according to the population pressure hypothesis, were pressured into thinking about doing something else, because people tend not to just sit down and die of starvation. They think of new things or they move away. So in this case, it was the pressure of starvation that forced people to realize that these plants like wheat and barley are actually seeds, and that you can save them and grow them the next year. And so if you look at a graph of population, so as the climate's getting warmer, your population is going up. When it gets cooler, you would expect your population to go down, but that's not the case. So how do you test a hypothesis like this? Well, you can look at village numbers, like how many Neolithic villages are surviving into the 7000s BC and later. Turns out there's lots more. You can look at grave sites and count actual numbers. You can go into a village itself and try and calculate the population. You can look at the archaeology of the land and see where it was being farmed, and it looks like more places are being farmed even though it's cooler. So people have discovered farming. Now again, these hypotheses can't tell us exactly where, when, or who, or even, well, yeah, they sort of explain why, but those are things that can't be totally answered. So you develop a hypothesis, you test it, and then it works. What I want to do for the rest of these slides is show you some slides from a Neolithic village called Çatalhöyük, and it was located in modern Turkey. And this slide in particular shows some of the modern roofing that's put over the site, because once you do a dig, you don't want to expose everything to land. This slide is showing you an interior of a recreated house at Çatalhöyük. And one thing you should note is to the left of this, where you see some light coming in, that is not a doorway. I'll explain this in just a bit. That leads into another room. A couple things to note. So you've got plaster on the walls. These people definitely decorated their houses. You've got a reed mat on the floor. Now remember, this is a recreated house, so you should ask yourself, how do we know they had reed mats? Well, it turns out that lots of these walls collapsed because they're mud brick. They were rained on, and the reed mat actually disappears, but the imprint of the reed mat stays. And as you can see, there's an oven in this room. So certainly these people were cooking in here. We don't know if, you can't call it a kitchen or living room. We're not quite sure exactly what's happening here. Now another thing to note is the ladder going up. That's not going to a second floor. That's actually going to the front door. So the Neolithic people at Çatalhöyük in Turkey developed their houses with front doors on the roof. So to get to your house, you'd walk across your neighbor's roofs, and then you'd open up your door, and then you would climb down into the house. So they did things a little bit differently than we do later. This slide is showing an archaeologist working on a wall with paint. So again, they clearly had. This slide number 12 is showing you more decoration on a wall. And what I want you to do is you can stop this video, take a look at that, and see if you can guess what that is. We also find lots of figurines at Çatalhöyük, and this one is of a bear. Now most of the figurines, if we're lucky, have a little scale at the bottom, which this one does. And so what it's telling you is that white section where it says cm, that's centimeter, then you've got a black square or rectangle, then you've got another white square. So what that's telling you is each one of those rectangles is a centimeter. So you've got 3 centimeters there. Now if you remember your metric system, 2.5 centimeters equals an inch. So now you can calculate the size of this bear. So it's probably 1.5 inches by, I don't know, maybe 3 inches, but fairly small. And we don't know what they did with these. Slide 14, you've got this very beautiful vase. And as you can see, or artistic, I'm not sure if it's a vase, but it's an image of a face. You can see the nose, you can see the lips, you can see the outline of the hair. So again, they were very artistic. And you should ask yourself, why can they be artistic during this period? It's because of farming. So farmers grow all your food. You don't have to spend all your time hunting and foraging. So farmers produce the food, and it leaves you time to do other things. I also have a whole bunch of these little figurines. So I'm just going to be pushing through these slides. You can certainly stop the video and take a look at them. Lots of these figurines are fairly small. So you can see, here you've got your scale again, 3 centimeters, and you can see from this person who's holding it how tiny. Slide 16 shows a small bear, a very small bear. Slide 17 is interesting because it shows a female figurine. And when this site was originally excavated, it just so happens that the archaeologist discovered a whole bunch of female figurines, and he then made the connection, which is probably not correct today, but that the site of Çatalhöyük might have had female rulers, or something called matriarchy. Today we don't believe that. More people are doing excavation at the site, and they're not finding as many female figurines as that first couple of years. So what are these figurines doing? Well, they could be fertility goddesses. You can see large breast, large stomach, large legs is pretty typical for female figurines in the ancient world. Another thing to consider is this might just be a toy. So imagine a Barbie doll, and think about an archaeologist coming into California in 5,000 years, digging up a house, and they discover a Barbie doll and hold it up and say, aha, these people in Hayward worshipped a female figurine. Well, we know that's not the case. Barbie is a doll, so these figurines could be goddesses, representations of goddesses, or boy. Now this on slide 18 is the most famous statue coming out of Çatalhöyük. And before I forget, just to let you know, part of this has been recreated. So her head has been recreated, and the lion on your right has been recreated. But anyway, here you've got a female sitting on what looks like a throne surrounded by lions. Now ask yourself, who is she? So if you can't think of the answer right away, take her out of the picture and imagine a male sitting there. A male sitting there with 2 lions beside him. What would you automatically think of? That he's a king. So now put her back in here. What is she? Well, she might be a queen. Again, no writing, so we're not quite sure what's happening here. You're probably just focusing on her face, body's the lion, but what I want you to do is look down by her feet. That round thing down by her feet is the head of a baby. So she's actually giving birth at this point. So what is she? She could be a fertility goddess. Excuse me. It's really hard to tell. She was found in a grain bin. So she might be a goddess of grain, protecting the crops and so on. Again, we're not quite sure. There are also grave sites at Çatalhöyük, and these are always interesting to look at. So in slide 19, what you're looking at is a female. And we know it's a female for 2 reasons. One, females have wider hips. And of course they have wider hips because they give birth. Another reason why, if you get very close and look at this, especially by her leg, the one that you can see the best, there are actually little ribs in there. So she was extremely close to giving birth. So definitely a female. Not quite sure if she died during childbirth or just before, but the important thing to remember about this is that she's folded up. So they fold up the bodies, they dig a trench, they put the body in there. Another thing to notice here is look at her head. So her head has been removed from her body and put off to the side. In a lot of Neolithic villages, this happens. So we definitely see it here. Now the other interesting thing about this is that people at Çatalhöyük did not bury their dead in a cemetery. So they buried their dead in their living areas, so within their houses. So they dug up what might have been a living room, put the body in the living area, and then covered it up. And in some rooms there's up to 50 bodies that were discovered. The next slide is just showing you another burial, a child's burial this time, but you notice that the body is folded up. And then this slide 21, what you're looking at is, I know it's a little hard to tell, but this is a necklace. And if you look to sort of the center left, you can see a string, and then what's surrounding that string is something green. And if you think about what metal turns green when it's exposed, it's copper. So we know that people at Çatalhöyük were definitely using copper at this period, and the bones above are the neck bones. So Çatalhöyük, they were doing artistic things, they were working with metals. Okay, so last slide here. So this, remember remember when we started out, I gave you a basic definition of civilization, and I would just want to give you a more detailed definition. So one, obviously cities. That's what I mean by urban focus. All these ancient people have religion. We might spend some time looking at religion, but just remember that each group of people had their own religious structures. Now when you get large groups of people living together, especially because of farming, you find one person takes control. Usually it's a king, sometimes it's a queen, and that's what I mean by new political structures. When you get cities being built, they have to be protected because they're obviously big symbols of wealth. So you get a military structure set up. One thing that definitely affects us today is the social structure that was developed in the ancient world. What you find is that the people who are wealthy are the ones who are in political control. And this remains the case all the way up to the modern period. And of course, we've talked about how all of these civilizations have writing. And the last part of this slide is artistic activity. So remember, they're farming. So farmers are growing the food, they sell it to the people in the city. The people don't have to spend time out in the fields, so they do other things. So you find artistic activity. Intellectual activity, what I mean by that is, in some societies, your job could be a philosopher. So you're thinking about life and doing things. You don't need to farm. You don't need to do physical labor. You can do this in an urban setting.